Okay, so first I just want to say welcome to everyone for being here tonight, and say that we, the Northwest Science Writers Association, would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of Coast Salish peoples, specifically the First People of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. I'm sharing this context now a little bit about why we do land acknowledgements for those who might not be familiar with it. Actually quoting directly from the Duwamish tribe about this, they say, "It's important to note that this kind of acknowledgement is not a new practice developed by colonial institutions. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. For non-Indigenous communities, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of the land on which we work and live. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth." And next, to introduce myself, my name is Ashley Braun. I am a freelance science and environmental journalist based in Seattle, and I'm the vice president of the Northwest Science Writers Association. If this is your first time joining us, we are a membership organization for science communicators of all kinds based in the Pacific Northwest. We have journalists and communications specialists for research institutes and universities, and we provide, often when we're outside of a pandemic, monthly in-person events in Seattle and Portland, occasionally elsewhere. We also have a variety of other resources and benefits to membership, including a writing award and grants for career development, as well as a mentorship program. And you can find more information about that on nwscience.org. I want to give a special word of thanks to our panelists here today who will be introducing themselves, and also just a brief word of thanks to NSWA member Sarah DeWert, and also the contributions of Anna Smith, who's an editor with High Country News, who helped behind the scenes pull together the fantastic panel that we have today. Just a note that this panel is being recorded, and we'll share the link to that afterwards. And just to give a rundown of how tonight is going to work, we'll be handing things over to Kelly Gonzalez, our moderator, and doing some introductions and diving into discussions tonight on around decolonizing science communication and what that means. And we'll be doing that for around 45 to 50 minutes. Then we'll jump into Q&A, which you can start putting your questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom screen. We'll try to leave about 20 minutes or so for that. Yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, Kelly, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. It's a good day. We have a lot to be thankful for. And so Ashley, thank you for that setting us up in a good way. I appreciate that. And thank you for bringing us all together. Yeah, tonight's going to be fun. We are together to talk about some really incredible ideas and thoughts, and to share our experiences with the participants. I want to just introduce myself real quick, and then the panelists will take a moment to introduce themselves. And then we have a few questions that we'll engage with, and then we'll end the evening with question and answers from the participants. And a few take-home thoughts for you all who are participating and joining us tonight. So thank you everyone for being here, especially if this is your first time engaging in topics related to Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and decolonization, and specifically decolonization. Thank you for taking that healthy risk and spending your evening with us. So my name is Kelly Gonzalez, and I'm not a journalist. I'm a professor at the Oregon Health Sciences Portland State University School of Public Health. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I say, though, that I come to the work first and foremost as an Indigenous person. I center myself and all my work in the love and support and hope for me that has been inspired into me from all of my ancestors. And when I do this work in public health as a researcher and educator, I really think about my children and my children's children. And so when I come here tonight, I think about all of you taking on that responsibility as well. And I can't wait to tell my children that you are looking out for them as well, that will lift their hearts. So thank you. So if, Deb, do you want to introduce yourself first? And then Trip, do you want to introduce yourself second? Okay, thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Hold on. The air around here is not very good today. My name's Deborah Kroll. I'm an enrolled member of the Hakalom or Halon tribe from the Central California coast. Currently reside in Phoenix on the traditional lands of the Akmel Atham or river people. And I live close by to some of my relatives, the Peeposh and the Fort McDowell Yavapai people. And I'm a Indigenous Affairs reporter with the Arizona Republic, where I do have to give a shout out to the people who are supporting my work, the Katina Foundation and Water Funders Initiative, who given the Republic a boatload of money to bring me on for a few years to report on the intersection of climate, culture, and commerce. So I tell everybody my new beat's kind of like my old beat because I've actually been a journalist for actually longer than my granddaughter's been alive. So, and I really thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and to kind of share what I know.
Thanks. First of all, I live and work on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina people. The Dena'ina Athabascans have stewarded this land and continue to steward it for is likely thousands of years. Anin Baju, Trip Kraus, Indigenica, Nijmana Duwag, Ojibwe, Indodum. What I said is I greeted you. Anin is I see your light, or I see the light in you, in Ojibwe Malum. And Boju is our typical like generic greeting, similar to Bonjour. So my name is Trip Kraus. I am Two-Spirit Ojibwe. My mother is Rose Ramsey from Hayward, Wisconsin. She is a enrolled tribal member of the Liquidator Band of Lake Superior Chippewa. My dad is Gerald Kraus, who lived and worked in Illinois for most of his life. I am the news director for KMBA Public Radio in Anchorage, Alaska. We are Native owned and operated. I am also the Station Advisory Committee Chair for Native Public Media, and I also represent Alaska on that panel. And I am also a board member of the Native American Journalists Association. So Chimigwech, thank you so much for having us be a part of this panel.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to point a couple of things out to the participants. So tonight we are talking about decolonizing practice within the field of journalism. And tonight you'll hear us visiting. You'll hear story being shared. You'll hear who we are. I'm moderating, so you won't hear a lot from me. But we are modeling to you Indigenous ways. We are modeling to you decolonized ways. We are modeling to you the meaning of relationship in all that we do. And these are practices that you can start to notice and also incorporate in your work. And we know that decolonizing is a practice, it's a process, and it also involves healing. So you'll hear all of those tonight, all those pieces. And so welcome, again, welcome. So okay, let's get started with the first question. I'm so excited. So let's see, the first question is, What is meant by decolonizing in science communication? What does that mean to you, decolonizing?
Decolonizing is a term that means essentially to bring the agency and power back into often the indigenous people of that land. I tend to use the term decentralize more than decolonize, just because I think decentralize has a much more broad context in regards to many of the different institutions that we have to operate within. But to me, they're essentially the same. I don't think I can decentralize something without also decolonizing it. Decolonizing is within science communication and in other things is looking at how a system of operation or an institution has operated in the past and how has it impacted the indigenous people of a land. And so it is a sometimes very difficult, hard look at the way that we engage with certain practices, and recognizing that because this is the way that we are often taught in institutions and universities, we often come up with it that that's the right way to go about it. Decolonizing is really looking at and questioning and challenging some of those aspects, because it's looking at the way that those are impacting indigenous people, which oftentimes is not in a beneficial way for that indigenous people or the land. And so to me, decolonizing is really looking at that and dismantling some of those harmful structures that have been utilized over now centuries of oppressing, harming, and erasing indigenous people. Decolonizing is sort of this term that we use. And a lot of people will use it in other general contexts, but it's a matter of like looking at the way that we do things. And is there a way that we can do them that is more sustainable and doesn't do harm to the people or the land that we're on? And to me, that's what decolonization is. And decentralization is more of like this larger work that we might have to do with, say, bigger institutions, whether that's government, universities, maybe even journalism, and how we can dismantle some of those things that have done harm in the past.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Deb, would you like to add anything to that?
I've been kind of thinking about this, and I frequently say decolonize because my people were, even though we were overrun by the Spaniards, the Mexicans, and the Americans, we never really got colonized by the Americans. We were never in that system. And so I've been kind of thinking about that, and I think in a way, when you're talking about decolonization, you're actually talking about re-indigenation, bringing these indigenous values of your culture, your community back into how you engage with people and how you engage as a governmental entity, how you relate to other peoples, to your neighbors, to the non-Indian neighbors, to the government, and how to basically reclaim that inherent sovereignty that so many of us have, that the colonial powers have kind of chipped away at.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. So one thing that came up for me when we were talking earlier and also just now, I think about the challenge of writing the work that you do within the context of a colonial system or colonial way of thinking. How do you overcome that type of pressure or constraint in your work so that you're able to uplift the needs of the communities that you're writing for?
Who's going first, Trip, you or me?
I think I'll defer to you on this one, and then I'll add.
Uh-oh. Trip.
I should be back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'll defer to Deb, and then I'll add.
Okay. Well, I've been writing and reporting on various facets of Indian country for more than 20 years. And a lot of that time I've spent writing for Native media, writing for niche media like environmental websites and smaller publications. Um, but last year I had an opportunity to join the staff of the Arizona Republic. First as a Pulliam Fellow, and now in my current position, which is, they say, permanent full-time. And I thought about it, and I feel that in my position, where I'm at right now in my career, I think I can do a lot more good speaking to people who need to learn about Indian country. I love writing for Native media. I love to report, I love all the people I worked with and will continue to work with, as friends. But I got the sense we were talking to each other. And what the people we need to talk to are the policymakers at the state house and the county courthouse and Washington, and people who run big industries, and ordinary people who don't really know anything about the people on whose land that they're living. And so I took this as an opportunity to start thinking about, how can I educate people? How can I give them information about Indian people the way they are today? We were talking earlier about looking behind the casino, ignore the poverty stats. I shared a little thing with Twitter, this Native comedian, about 198% unemployment and minus 39% happiness, all done to flute music. But it's a humorous way of illustrating how much of mainstream media reports on Indian country. And the Arizona Republic is really making an effort to try to bring more of that Indigenous perspective into stories. And so I don't really feel like I'm constrained, other than normal journalistic practices. They seem to appreciate when I report it's from the Indigenous perspective, as long as I adhere to some sort of fairness. It's okay to say that 99 people feel one way and one person feels the other way, and not have that false 50-50 perspective. So I have to say I'm having a blast. People listen to me. People want to hear what I have to say. We do have another Indigenous affairs reporter, Shondine Silversmith, who's been there like longer than I have, and she's reporting on Indigenous communities. And it's, I guess the best thing is that I feel I'm in a good place, and I'm hoping that people read the stories and really have an opportunity to learn about the communities that they're living in, and get a new perspective on Indigenous peoples around the Southwest.
Yeah, I think my mission has been largely growing up as a kid in the Midwest, and a brown kid, essentially, in a very white environment. That lack of representation and visibility was really what pushed me to do. I didn't even realize journalism was a thing that you could do to make a living. I saw people on TV doing like news anchoring things, but I didn't know how to get there. And so I took this sort of surreptitious route to get where I am. But after spending about 12, 13, 14 years in newspapers, and I enjoyed the work that I did, but I recognized that I didn't see myself represented either as someone telling stories or represented in the stories. And so I made a push about 4 to 5 years ago to change that in my life and take more of a concerted effort into finding these stories, talking with folks, and really sort of exploring what being a storyteller and journalist means in an Indigenous realm. And for me, a lot of it is communicating, and it's working with folks, organizations who are making a conscious effort to sort of look at and examine the way that we've been operating, and understanding that something needs to happen, and we need to make some changes so that the way this representation has been in the past doesn't continue. Like that it's changed and it's increased. And so part of that is for me to reach out and talk with organizations, work with reporters who might not be so familiar with covering issues in Indian country. And when we say Indian country, I should say that Indian country is the catch-all term that we use to mean sort of Indian people, reservations, also Alaska Native corporations. It's sort of this catch-all term that we use, and it's a legal definition. So when we say Indian country, we mean a couple of different things, but I wanted to clarify that just really quick. But it also means that working and recruiting and getting Indigenous writers and reporters and scientists in position to be able to sort of affect that change at a larger pace. And so it's really about helping people, train people. You know, one of the things that we would really like to do in our organization, KMBA, is, yes, I'm Indigenous, but I'm not Alaska Native, and we cover a lot of Alaska Native issues. So my goal would be to get someone who is Alaska Native and willing to tell those stories in my position. And I tell my boss, I'm like, if I put myself out of a job, I will have done some good, because I would have put someone in that position that is much more suited to be in it and be able to tell those stories than I am. But it really requires a lot of work. It requires reaching out. So I want to say thanks to Anna, who reached out and suggested us. Anna has been a huge ally, has worked with High Country News on the Indigenous Affairs desk for a while now, and is pretty knowledgeable about a lot of key issues. So, you know, and I think that speaks to a larger work that both like High Country News, some other organizations, the Native American Journalists Association, are really trying to do. We're trying to show people that the way that this has been covered in the past is not in a good way. It does more harm, and it continues to perpetuate harm that has been done to Indigenous people since contact. And when we say contact, we mean colonial contact. So in the lower 48, that might mean, you know, Spanish contact in the Southwest, or European contact in the East. For Alaska, that means actually 3 different fronts. We had Russians come in, we had the United States Frontiers people come in, and then we also had Canadians sort of move in. So when we say contact, that's what we mean. We mean there's contact, pre-contact, and post-contact. But it is really a matter of like changing this large-scale perspective. And a lot of times that starts at a very small moment, where maybe you make a connection with someone and you get them to sort of understand the ways that the way that we have been doing harm, because from a centralized viewpoint, we may not realize that convention of journalism or science writing or science has been used to do harm. And so understanding how that has impacted people is dramatically important to deconstructing that and building something that is valuable for everyone. And honestly, I think it's not even about the way we're seeing the conversation now. It's not even just Indigenous people, right? It's the way we write about Black people, African-American people, people of color. We've been dealing with this for a long time, and I think we're at a point in time where our voices are loud enough, and we've finally made some headway into having these conversations. And so right now is a very vital time, and so it's really important that we do this work.
And I grew up in my homeland in California, where the local people knew who we were, but Stanford didn't know who we were. Berkeley didn't know who we were. They were going to Window Rock. They were going to Rapid City. They were going to Phoenix. They were recruiting Native students from all over the place. But there was this disconnect that there were California Indians still around. And maybe they should be, driving 100 miles and recruiting, or driving 20 miles to where there was a little community of Muwekma Ohlone people living, or, driving 50 miles up to Maidu territory. That's, whether conscious or unconscious, that's like an erasure where you're not paying attention to the Native people who are your neighbors. And I think that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier that I want to try to get through is I want people to learn about the people who inhabit the lands that they're living on. Even here in Phoenix, where there's like the second or third largest population of what we call urban Indians, people who've chosen to live in the city, or their descendants who grew up in the city. A lot of times we're invisible to them, and we want to raise that awareness that there are Indigenous peoples here in Phoenix who are lawyers, who are doctors, who work construction, who are teachers, professors. The largest builder of affordable housing in the city of Phoenix is Native American Connections, which started as a substance abuse treatment organization. And these are things that people don't even think about. So this is what I want to raise awareness of is opening people's eyes and opening their minds to the fact that Native peoples are still here, and we are still practicing our traditional ways. We're still practicing our cultures. We're doing our best to keep our peoples alive and thriving. And we're not a person of the past. We don't have 198% poverty rate. I know that was so funny. And in that regard, I'm willing to go report on whatever I need to report on and to get those stories out there. And I think that's where I come from. Oh, and I forgot. The other thing is that I tell people who I am, they're going, there's no Indians in California. And I go, well, there's 700 and some thousand Indians. I said, but about 25% of that number are Indigenous to California. And they go, oh, but they're all gone. They know about the genocide, but they don't realize that people survived the genocide and we're still there. So that's a big part of what drives me, is we're still here, we're still practicing our cultures. Like I said, Kanchanal, Creator, comes to Earth and tells the people that he put there, because we refer to Creator in the male gender, that our job is to maintain the ecology, to steward the land, to make sure that we have biodiversity, to make sure that the land stays healthy for the animals, for the plants, the fish, the birds. Thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, we were given these instructions, and that has never been rescinded. So we are still responsible. We still have that responsibility, and we still have that inherent sovereignty to do these things. So I guess that's the other thing that drives me.
And to follow up on Deb's point, it's often, if I'm editing something that someone else who maybe is non-native has written, and they're writing about Indigenous people in the past tense, like so-and-so lived here. I'm like, well, have you fact checked that? Do you know that there are no other people that are living there? So if you're writing about Indigenous people in the past tense, that's a flag for me. And so that's something that I would often challenge someone to do their due diligence. But just like land acknowledgements, it's it's not just something that we're doing because it's politically correct. It's something because we are actually acknowledging that there were people here and continue to steward the land that we are on. And so that's vitally important. So knowing what land you're on is important. Knowing, finding out who the tribes that are near you is vastly important. And then continuing to write about all people in the present rather than in the past, because unfortunately I think that's a trope, and I may offend any anthropologists in the room, but a lot of times this Western centric viewpoint of science tends to look at like, well, as we're moving here, anything that was before us is now in the past. But for a lot of Indigenous folks, and I don't want to put everyone in the same silo, but for a lot of folks, our past is still part of very much our present, and it's very much part of our future. We say things like ancestors, but for many Indigenous people, not all, but many, ancestors is a term that we use to mean people who have passed on, the people who are here, and the people who will come after us. And it's not just a way for us to say ghosts and dead people. It's a way because we continue to think of things in the present. We're here and we continue to steward the land. We continue to work with this relationship with the land and make sure that everything that we do is sustainable. So yeah, just writing about Indigenous people in the present, and then being aware of whose land you're on, and acknowledging that and recognizing that, and even doing that every day is a really great affirmation to decentralize the way that we think about the world, because so often we come from our perspective, and part of that decolonization process is to decentralize it and realize that we're part of a holistic system. So thank you.
And I think in speaking of holistic, I was mentioning earlier that I actually went to college to be a science writer. At the time, like in the late 1990s, last century, they were actually recruiting Native people to be science writers because they figured we could bridge that gap between, Indigenous knowledge and Western science. And I said, well, okay, it's a way to get through school. I had a scholarship, and they gave me a job helping other people write their papers, and life was good. And then I started studying biology, genetics, physics, physiology, all the other things that go along with the biological sciences, because that's what I was going to specialize in. And one day the light bulb went off in my head, and I'm going, what am I studying this for? I already know this stuff. And the reason I know it is because my grandparents, my aunties, my uncles, the elders all explained all of this to me and to my brothers and sisters. And I'm trying to make sure I'm passing this on to my grandchildren, that knowledge of how the world works, how the ecology works, what our role is in maintaining the environment of which we are a part. And so you're all science writers. You're used to thinking in classifications and quantification and models and statistics and data sheets and Excel spreadsheets. We think of it from a whole systems approach. We know that if we go and burn a certain patch of land this year, then next year the hazel sticks will grow up nice and straight for baskets. The animals and the birds will have enough room to run around in and have food to eat. The watersheds will be healthier because all the duff will be gone. The fish will be happy. Biodiversity increases, and there'll be plenty of food for everybody. And we know what happens if we marry too closely. You get, Western science calls it reinforcing lethal recessives and decreasing genetic health. We simply call it marrying too close and your kids have something wrong with them. We know that you have to maintain the bloodline strong, and the way to maintain these strong bloodlines is through diverse marriage. And I did an internship with the Science and Technology News Network one time, And we were explaining all of this, and one of the scientists pops up and says, "Oh, that's a sociological solution to a biological genetic problem. Is our marriage customs, and those again those vary from tribal culture to tribal culture, but throughout Indian country, you're going to see that they all have some way of ensuring that the children born have the best chance to survive and to thrive in the world because thousands of years ago, we figured out basic genetics. Um, and we do the same thing with when we increase biodiversity. My grandfather did the same thing when he raised fruits and vegetables, and he saved the seeds from the healthiest ones, and continue to develop those. I just did a story on a domesticated species of agave that has somehow survived all of the disruptions of contact era. You know, these things were developed by humans to provide not only for humans but for other species. So when I hear somebody talking that way, I'm going, okay, how would my grandma say it? How would my uncle have said it? How would my great grandmother have said it when they were all still here on the earth? And so if you're gonna write science in Indian country, you need to kind of start thinking systems or figure out some way to convert your classifications of biological structures to how we do them. I see something from Trip regarding my buddy Roxanne's book. Oops, Trip. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Robin was asking about book recommendations. So when we're talking about policy and things that you're looking to decolonize, I often recommend Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, which is Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. Start there. It's a really great book, and it starts from like hypothetically tens of thousands of years ago and moves right into present day. And then David Troyer's book, Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, is sort of a retelling of a book by D. Braun. Troyer's native. So that one's really a really great book. And then I also really like Decolonizing Methodologies, which if you're more into science writing, along with like what Deb is talking about, that might be a book that you would find interesting.
And again, you have to understand that different parts of the country, Native people engage with Europeans in different ways. Like on the East Coast and the West Coast, we like to call ourselves first contact tribes because even though the Spaniards had penetrated into the Southwest before they got to California, they engaged with the people in the Pueblos in a different way that they engaged with Native peoples along the coast. They considered the Pueblo people to be basically civilized, and all they had to do was teach them Spanish and make them Catholics. And yes, they did have a lot of the same traumas and tried to enslave Pueblo people, but they basically engaged with them as people who were at least semi-civilized. Then they got to California, and we had no reason to wear lots of clothes because the weather was nice. We didn't have row crops. We would maintain our oak groves, and we maintained the watersheds, and we made sure that the coastal waters and the estuaries were clear so that we could reap abalone and seaweed out of them. So they didn't see any row crops. And we didn't have permanent houses because it's an earthquake-prone area. So we just built our little tule huts in case there was an earthquake. Might knock down squish a basket or something, but you wouldn't have to worry about rebuilding it. And of course, we didn't speak Spanish and weren't Catholics. So they engaged with us as if we were savages and people who were in need of being civilized. On the East Coast, you had the English mainly, and the French, and they were treaty-making people. and they made treaties with the peoples they encountered. That's one reason that Mashpee Wampanoag tribe has managed to hold on to its reservation, its trust lands, because there were treaties stretching clear back to before the Revolutionary War that guaranteed them that land. But then, because they had engaged with Europeans so much longer, there were definitely, more removals. There was a lot more oppression. Eventually, you don't see any native tribes in southern New York because they all got either removed to they fled to Canada. A few of them got removed to Minnesota and Wisconsin. The rest were killed. And there's a few little remnant communities on the New Jersey side that are trying to become federally recognized now. You don't have any tribes in Pennsylvania. They all got removed, either to Canada or killed or South Oklahoma. The same with Vermont, the same with New Hampshire. The tribes in Maine only got recognized in the 1970s. And so those people have no idea that there's even Indians amongst them. At least out here we have tribal communities. So again, if you're going to write about Indian people, learn about the tribes that are living nearby you before you do anything else. Roxanne's book is an excellent overview throughout the country, and Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is a really good one for the Plains people. If you want to read about California, I would start with Kent Lightfoot's book, Indians, Missionaries, and Merchants. We have a couple of other books about the California genocide. Murder State is one of them. That's a really good book. It's very hard to read. And let's see, Trip, what other kind of general books for Indian history or culture? I was thinking the rights of Indians and tribes.
That was one of them I posted. Yeah, I think one of the things, and we had this conversation earlier, where when you're covering Indigenous communities, there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done from a reporting standpoint to understand why, why is there reservations? Why was there migrations from various parts of the one area to the next? Some of it, Indigenous people did migrate. That was the thing that we did. But there's also forced migration. Obviously, the Trail of Tears is one that comes up. But understanding a larger context of, why there's certain Indigenous policy, or why we look at, when we say sovereign, a lot of people don't necessarily know what sovereign means, but sovereign is essentially recognizing something as an independent government in which nation to nation negotiations can happen. And so that is a policy that's sort of set up from the doctrine of discovery and like the 1400s, all the way to the John Marshall decisions that really set the rest of the timeline for the way Indigenous policy is sort of viewed and utilized. A lot of people may not understand why don't the Indigenous people own their land? Well, they had no system of ownership. No, that's not actually true. There were plenty of tribes that quote unquote owned land. But what happened was the doctrine of discovery basically said that European-based countries that discovered land in the name of the church that had not been discovered by another country in the name of the church could be basically declared for that country. And so the Marshall decision is one in which the same property was purchased by from someone. They had purchased it from the government, and someone had purchased it from the natives. And so there was a lawsuit, and it went all the way to the high court. Marshall, using the doctrine of discovery, declared that Indigenous people did not have right to title on their land. They had the right to live and subsist on it, but they didn't have ownership of the land. And so that decision essentially is what catapulted a lot of the policy that we would see. But I do encourage you to get into the history of that, because part of that decision and others was the fact that Virginia was a Commonwealth, and if you served as the militia, in the militia, you were able to receive a pension. And at the time of those decisions, there was a conflict between Indians who lived in that area and people who lived in Virginia, and that decision actually enabled John Marshall then to receive his pension because there were no more natives living on that land. And you sort of see how this, when we talk about decolonizing, you see how this is like, it just steamrolls all the way across the country in regards to the way Indigenous people are affected. So the thing that I really like about Roxanne's book is that a lot of history books coming from a Western perspective will start with contact on the East Coast. Roxanne's actually starts with the hypothetical migration from Alaska down down the West Coast into Mexico, South America, and then back up. And there's a lot of history there. I mean, that's coffee and corn and not melons, but like squashes and things that we normally perceive as being these sort of staples are a product of thousands of years of migration and communities working together and interrelated. And where Roxanne's book gets really interesting is when those two, we sort of talked about Western civilization and Indigenous values and methodologies. And so like when those two connect, that's sort of when you start seeing things like the Trail of Tears and the migration from Georgia through into Oklahoma and on. So really getting a very deep understanding of how policy might affect the Indigenous people in your area can be extremely valuable. And when you go, like you want to report on Indigenous communities, understanding that there are already sort of these standard like aggressions that have happened in the past, and not knowing about those can actually do harm to a community that you might be reporting on. So I did want to say, Deb led me right into it. So particularly for the Northwest Science Writers Association is, don't just think about like Washington or Oregon. Indigenous people have lived on this land for long before there were borders, right? State borders, federal borders. And so when you're looking at policy and health or issues that might affect people within your community, sometimes looking across the border and seeing how things operated there. So when we talk about books that I really like, James Daschuk, who I don't think is native, but wrote a book called Clearing the Plains, Disease, Politics of Starvation, and the Loss of Aboriginal Life. And this is one of those where I'm like, I have tons of notes in it, and I love it. It's a hard read because it really does look at the colonial expansion west in Canada, and as it kind of moves over Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people, but it really helps analyze the way that sort of this Western view of the nuclear family, or what the definition of cleanliness might be, and using that as a staple in your science to use against Indigenous people who may have lived in extended families. Maybe they didn't have access to running water, so the idea that something might be dirty, it's a completely different, are there bugs or not? Like there's this whole difference between perspectives, and I think that's where we really see a lot of the sort of critical work happen, is showing how that Western view has sort of imposed on Indigenous lifeways. It still happens with adoption and things like of that nature. Thankfully, there are cases like ICWA and a number of other things that are instituted to sort of try to help with that, but we're still facing a lot of, aggressions, and aggressions is a weird word, but we're still facing sort of the struggle of operating within those two systems.
And kind of jumping on something that Tripp said, I've done quite a bit of coverage on foster children. Here in Arizona, well, and throughout Indian country, you wouldn't normally, in pre-contact days, obviously there was no such thing as the state coming and taking your kids if you couldn't take care of them. If, you know, one reason we had extended families was that if one parent died or otherwise was unavailable, there were other adults who were invested in that child. And you wouldn't have to worry about, you know, the nuclear family is actually not a very stable way to go. You want to have aunties, uncles, grandparents, you know, other people who are relatives who are invested in making sure that these children survive and thrive and grow up to be productive, healthy, happy adults who can in turn raise their own children. So when all of these upheavals happened, the boarding school era is one of the proximate causes of why our families are in such a hot mess right now. When you don't have adult role models to follow to be good parents, and you're put in a regimented situation and you're abused physically, emotionally, mentally, in a lot of cases sexually, what kind of a grown-up are you going to be? What kind of a parent are you going to be? And that in turn has contributed to a multi-generational cycle of people who don't know how to parent, who can't parent their children appropriately, and those children grow up. And now we know the science behind this, and it's called toxic stress syndrome. But there's still a lot of functional families in Indian country, and if a mother or a father or the parents can't take care of the children, normally the family member would go get that child and take them into their home and take care of them. And in order to become a foster parent, though, you have to take all these classes. You have to have a certain amount of physical space for each child. So when I grew up, you know, we had 3 and 4 kids to a bedroom, and nobody cared. These days, we have 4 kids in the bedroom. There's something wrong, and the state might come and say, "Oh, you're neglecting your child." So a lot of the grandparents and aunties and uncles who want to take care of their grandchildren or their nieces or nephews are not able to because they can't get the financial support that being a licensed foster parent would give them. And the kids get into the system. So one of the things that when you're out there thinking about, you know, if you're doing like behavioral health reporting, these are issues that you need to be aware of, that the way that we parent and the way that, or traditionally the way that we parented and the way we still want to parent and the way that we want to raise our children and we want to be able to do this kinship care is impeded by state and federal policies. So if you're going to do what they call solutions journalism, should you be talking to behavioral health specialists? Should you be talking to Indian child welfare experts? Should you be talking to state foster care agencies and asking them, why are you not making an exception for tribal families? Are you talking to tribal behavioral health and tribal family service agencies that are trying to help their families get around the situation to where they can take in their family members and raise them in a stable environment? That to me, right, is just one example of how Western federal state policies are antithetical to Indigenous ways of thinking and doing and living.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you both for all of your work. I feel inspired. I just really thank you both for what you're bringing to the field, and all of the knowledges that you bring to the field. I especially appreciate that how you've modeled talking about Native folk from a place of strength, and that's something that I'm really going to walk away with, is learning about like even looking in my own work as an Indigenous person, how am I even falling into those traps of colonial mindsets and logics in our system that has trained us well to think of ourselves or think of our communities from a place of kind of, desperation. But I remember also that I'm here as a descendant of miracle survivors of genocide. And that is remarkable. And that is the story I want my children to hear. So I just love that you two are here doing this work and really modeling how to do this work in such a good way to center and lift up our strengths. And the importance of relationship. I really hear that clearly as well. It's such a commitment, this work. I'm going to go ahead and turn to a couple of the questions that are coming in. I'm going to go ahead and read, let me see here. I'll just go with the first question. So I think we're ending about 7:45, and so I'll try to keep us to that. But if we need to go over a little bit, I can go until 8 o'clock. But folks should feel willing, feel fine to just jump off the call at 7:45. But if we need to, we can go to 8 o'clock maybe. If the questions are really juicy. Okay, so here's the first question. What are some microaggressions that you've experienced in in-person interactions and in journalism writing through the white colonized lens? And then how can we avoid them as science writers? So I think that's how can science writers. Yeah.
I'll let Deb take it if
okay.
I mean, there are plenty in my experience. The idea of so my father is white, my mother is Native. I am not a tribal member, but in my mind, I have a direct lineage to a tribe and a tribal member. In my mind, I am Native. There's no question about it. I'm Ojibwe, Native, and no one can take that away from me. You run into an issue, blood quantum is probably a word that anybody reporting on Indian country will run into. And it's, as Indigenous people are the only people in the United States who has to prove their indigeneity by a percentage of blood, next to purebred dogs and horses. The United States has a history of using quote unquote blood quantum in regards to two races when identifying them as such race: Indigenous people and Black people. There's the blood quantum for Indigenous people, and there was the one drop rule used to institutionally oppress and enslave people who were of African heritage. And so when you look at those, you really start to see, it's like, well, there's two standards here, but both standards were being used to oppress people. So I think, blood quantum is one. If you are a non-Native person, you should not be policing whether or not someone is Indigenous or not. There are also many people who are quote unquote freedmen who come from both Black and Native history and heritage. And there is a conversation happening right now with a popular science fiction writer who is Black and Pueblo and of a Dene family, married into a Dene family, in which her lineage is often questioned because of things that she's using in stories, and there's a racial divide even within many Indigenous communities as well, that it's like we're suddenly now having to police our own identity. And so as a reporter, it is certainly behooves you to double check and fact check. And if someone says that they're Indigenous and they can show a direct line, it's like, okay, well, who's your family? And can you tell me which tribe? That's dramatically different than saying, oh, can I see your BIA card? Or can you prove that? Asking them in a way that, I mean, we love talking about our families. So like, that's the easiest in, right? Like, oh, who's your family? Who's your, and mine, it gets a little weird because my mother's parents died when she was really young. And so my mom is really the last in that line that I know of. But it's not up to you to police someone's indigeneity. There are ways that you can fact check it. If they say that they're a tribal member, you can actually call that tribe and say, so-and-so says they're a tribal member. Can you verify that for me? That's not something that you'll see very often, but I guarantee you, if they're not a tribal member and you call that tribe and they say no, they're going to start having questions about it. So, but it's important to know that when you're talking with folks, asking them like what percent of Native that they are is, I wish I had Deb's face right then and there on like a GIF, but that's a big problem. But asking them, who their family is, and if they are Native, like, who are your family, and can you kind of tell me how your lineage comes to you, essentially. So I think policing indigeneity, and a lot of times you might have to be the advocate when it goes time to when you have an editor or you go to someone and to edit your story. You might have to be that advocate, because I guarantee you probably 8, maybe 9 times out of 10, that person doesn't have a background in covering Indigenous issues. So really knowing, so I refer to it as showing your work. If you can show an editor essentially that you are familiar enough with the terms and backgrounds that you're using, oftentimes that can be enough. Yeah, I just think the blood quantum thing is one that often comes up, and it can be a tricky one to sort of navigate, particularly if you're not Native.
Yeah,
Great.
If your tribe claims you, you're a member of that tribe. If you're enrolled, you're a member of the tribe or a citizen, or however you want to say it. I always like to ask, are you enrolled? Are you a descendant? Are you a citizen? Do you have heritage? And the majority of Native people will not mind that. In fact, they want to be able to say, yeah, I'm enrolled Nez Perce, or there's this one gentleman I talked to that says, I have Choctaw heritage, but for whatever reason, my family wasn't able to enroll, but the Choctaw people acknowledged me as a community member, so I'm considered a Choctaw descendant. That's great, So it would be an enrolled member of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation, or a community member of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation, because they have community members who can't enroll, but they're still considered members of the community. And the simplest way to do is, like Tripp said, just ask. And if you have any doubts, you can call the tribe, or you can start saying, who are you related to? What community in the tribal land do you come from? That's why I tell everybody I'm just a Halone Indian, because the bulk of our ancestral ties are to this town called Huckalome, which is in the Limotnon district over by Mission San Antonio, where it's at now. So everybody knows where Halone is. They know where I'm from. They know who I am. And the blood quantum thing is like, OMG. Again, it goes right back to native genetics. There is no such thing as a full-blood Indian, guys. I'm sorry, there's not. And native people hate it when they say that, but it's true. Because we have always had ways to, unless you're in a really, really huge tribe like Navajo Nation, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to marry within your tribe. You need to marry an Indian person of another tribe, or you need to marry a non-Indian, or you need to marry, I would say either an Indian of another tribe or a non-Indian. We won't get into other things, but my husband, my first husband is Seneca from New York State. Second husband is born of the Polish clan and born to the Ukrainians. And if you want to talk about Navajo genealogy. So it is what it is. We are a mixed people, but what really counts is, where did you grow up? Whose people did you grow up with? Did you grow up with your mother's people? You grew up with your father's people? What community are you part of? I grew up with my mother's people, the Hakkalom Salinan people. I'm enrolled in that tribe. My father used to run around saying he was Cherokee. We found that it wasn't true, so I don't say that. There are people who run around saying they're Cherokee. I would question them very closely, but there are some other people that say other things, and if you have any doubts, you know what to do.
The other thing is each tribe has its own guidelines. So part of being sovereign is they can determine, they have self-determination, so they can determine who are members and who are not. That often comes into play when you talk about disenrollment, and people lose their tribal membership from that. But some tribes will claim they will take you as a member, and you may not even be native, but you have a close enough relationship with that community, and maybe you're sort of part of a family, even though that there's not a blood tie. They will actually give you membership. Ketchikan Indian Association here in Southeast Alaska, you can be a member of the KIA, but there's not a particular tribe that you have to be. You can sort of be like any tribe, as long as you're native and you can sort of show your work that you are native. To my understanding, that's sort of the policy that they have. So different tribes have different policies in regards to membership. So if someone says that they're a member, I mean, you should probably look into seeing what that enrollment status is like, what are some of the criteria that they're looking for, and if that changes, then you're sort of aware of it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and read another question, and let's see. As someone trained in institutional science who wants to become an ally to Indigenous peoples and their traditional ecological knowledge, besides reading your book recommendations, where can we begin?
Finding your local cultural center, probably. If there is one, that would be a good place to start. Ashley had shared the nativeland.ca map, and that can be a really great resource to look at and see whose land are you on. And oftentimes a Google search will help you sort of point you in the right direction. Without knowing exactly where someone is at, it's hard for me to really say where to go. But if there is a cultural center, or if there is a tribe who maybe has a cultural center in your area, that's a really great place to start. If you are a science writer and you are a journalist, the Native American Journalists Association has some really great resources to go to. There are some other organizations that you could look at. The NCAI, which is the National Congress of American Indian, has some really good resources to go to, and they might be able to have someone that can point you in the right direction. But without knowing very specific information of where you're at, and not knowing that region, or even if I did know it, I might not be able to give you a really good pathway. But if you have a cultural center, start there. Otherwise, there are organizations that can put you on the right path.
Okay, let's go to another question. Let's see here. What has been your experience like addressing the MMIWG epidemic? Is there a cultural divide that non-Native writers must be aware of when addressing the topic beyond the legal and political distinctions, i.e. for urban Indians versus Native people living on reservations?
I'll let Deb start with that one, and then I'll take.
The missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic is everywhere. It's in tribal lands. It's in cities. It's anywhere that there's a Native person who might be a target. So I think you're talking about the difference between, a person living in tribal lands and how the tribal law enforcement might deal with that, versus if they're not living in their tribal lands, if you have local law enforcement that gets involved with that. There are organizations that I have written about, of several Native nonprofits that are both on and off tribal lands who are working to deal with the situation. We've got a study group going on here at the state of Arizona, spearheaded by our Native women legislators, to study ways that the state and the tribal law enforcement and behavioral health and family services can all develop joint policies to address this. Because Native women in particular are prime targets for human traffickers, because we can look like anybody. We can look like Asians, we can look like Hispanics, we can look like Europeans, sometimes we can look like African Americans, and the people who patronize these human trafficking operations might say, I want an Asian girl, and they'll drag out a Hopi, that they've either groomed or outright kidnapped and forced into prostitution. They swap the girls around, so they might be groomed, say in Window Rock in the Navajo Nation, and next thing you know, they end up in LA, they end up in Chicago. That's why it's really important, if you're going to write about it, to figure out the organizations that are dealing with this from the local perspective, whether it's tribal or community, up to the national level. The Department of Justice does have there is a department that deals with this issue, and they're trying to work with some of the other law enforcement. But it is probably one of the most affecting issues I've ever had to write on. Once they are trafficked, it's extremely difficult to get them out. The survivors that manage to get out are they're scarred for life. Sometimes physically scarred, because they'll tattoo them. Their pimps will tattoo them so they would know who they belong to. They are controlled. Sometimes you can get them out of the life and they go right back in because they don't know any other way to do it. It is just a really scary situation. And just personally, if you have teenagers, watch what they do on the internet very, very, very closely. You don't know who's out there who's trying to find kids to groom. The boys, they mostly put into labor camps. The girls, of course, they mostly put into prostitution. It could be, sometimes the girls are made to be maids, and of course they're abused by the people that they're maids for. I'm sure that there are some boys who are taken into prostitution, but like I said, if you have a teenager at home, and they start getting sticky about you watching their internet, I would suggest you take them to an organization that's trying to get people out of prostitution and scare the heck out of them. You know. Anyways, yeah, I guess you can tell it's kind of a hard thing for me to talk about, even though I've not personally or had very many family members experience it. It's a hard thing. And if you, like I said, if you're going to write about it, you're going to have you may end up with nightmares, guys. So the people who are dealing with this are saints. It's it's just heartbreaking, and it's not just Native people, of course, but you know we're concerned with the missing and murdered women and other people of color. I guess the other side of this is domestic violence. And again, that goes right back to policies to disrupt Native families. Historically, they figured they would bust up tribes by not only the boarding schools, but they eviscerated the roles of men. They kept them from doing what they needed to do to care for their families, which was hunting or herding or doing all the other things that men normally do to provide for their families. They made them dependent on the government. They gave them whatever kind of mind-altering things they needed to get them into submission. They broke them. And again, you have these men who have been broken. They don't know how to be fathers, and they father their sons, and their sons turn around and do the same thing. It's a really, 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 oh yeah, there it is, sovereign bodies, that's one of them.
Yeah, and part of the issue too that we're like, as Indigenous people sort of reporting on this, that we're running into is the lack of a consensus on data.
Yeah.
So even if someone is sort of found, their racial profile in a police report might not reflect who they actually are. You run into this when you report on domestic violence. Sometimes things are reported as suicides, and we're, you know, even today we're seeing things that are sort of reported as suicide when there's a lot of question that sort of surrounds it. So just sort of knowing, I guess, where to go to. Sovereign Bodies is a really great one. There's another nonprofit that just started here in Alaska that's really working to try to pull in this information. And when you look at a federal level, there are so many different databases that don't talk to each other.
Oh yeah.
And so you run into not having, like, you don't have a good data set to work on and work from. For me, some of the more powerful writing, a lot of times when we're reporting on MMIW, and it goes back to the whole writing about us as if we're present. I run into this with a lot of journalists here in Alaska, where when someone has died and they want to do an MMIW story, they either want to cover, a lot of times they'll cover the women's, they may come from a very destitute lifestyle. Maybe they're poor, they're homeless, maybe they're living on the street, so they're resorting to prostitution and drugs. But the way that gets written about versus the way that, like, if the perpetrator of the crime is found is vastly different. They will say, oh, well, he had a really good job and a loving wife at home. We don't understand why this happened. But the way, like, when you start looking at the parallels now, like, there's a disproportionate way in which Indigenous people are written about in these circumstances versus the way law enforcement and the perpetrators are written, not putting those two together, but the way that the not native and non-native are written about, there's this huge discrepancy. And so understanding that and the way that we're writing about it, but also, like, even it is deeply saddening when someone loses that battle and passes away, but you can still write about the person that gives them strength in that. And there are some really great journalists that do that who aren't native, but that's just the way that they write. So really being hypercritical about how we process that information and being critical of ourselves when we write things in a way that might create this disparity between two different groups.
And data continues to be a problem. It's almost impossible to determine exactly how many Native people have been diagnosed with, become ill with, or passed away from COVID. It's extremely difficult. Arizona Department of Health Services says they don't want to release the stats because they don't have permission from the tribes, which is kind of bogus. Some of the tribes do a really, really good job for people who live within their tribal borders. Like Navajo is doing a really good job. But if a Navajo person lives in Phoenix or lives in Albuquerque or lives in Salt Lake City or LA, and they become ill with COVID-19, they're not going to be counted in the Navajo Nation statistics. They'll be counted in the LA County statistics, and they may or may not have their ethnicity reported on. I ran into a lot of that doing the story on heat and heat-related deaths in the valley. And I have no clue where they got the percentage of Native people who died from summer heat in the valley, because only about 20% at the top, at the very most, of the 164 autopsy reports I read had anything about ethnicity. So it's impossible to tell how many people are getting sick from COVID, how many Native people are being diagnosed. A lot of the people say at Fort McDowell, which is the tribal community I was referring to earlier, a lot of those tribal members have the tribe will pay for them to go to Mayo Clinic. And so they get counted in the Mayo Clinic statistics. Well, is Mayo Clinic keeping track of how many Native people are coming into the facilities with COVID versus people of other ethnicities like Hispanic or Anglo or Black? So data is always a huge, huge issue. Trying to do surveys, anytime you see a survey of Native Americans, it's most likely extremely inaccurate. And then the people who do try to do surveys or try to, they'll do like a political survey. Well, how many Native people did you survey? We don't have a big enough statistical sample. Trying to get health data. The tribes have been practically having to sue to get COVID health data. It's really, really hard. So if you're going to be a data reporter and working in Indian country, it would be, my grandma would say, it would be enough to drive a preacher to swear. The other thing she would say when it got really bad is, I'm going to drive a preacher to drink. Because data is a huge problem, with MMIW, with we don't even know how many people in Navajo Nation don't have water. Navajo Nation says it's 15%. Some of the people I talk to out in the community say it's closer to 50%, because when somebody gets water for the first time in their home, all of a sudden you see these little tough sheds popping up, little hogans, and they're hooking into their relatives' water. So technically, they don't have running water. They're just glomming off their relatives' water. So that statistic is, whatever statistic anybody's telling you, take it with a grain of salt. When I did the Navajo Nation water story, I just reported, Navajo Nation says they've worked a backlog down to 15%. People in Cameron say, no, it's more like 40, 50% because of this. And they're really afraid that the census is not going to really record how many people don't have running water on Navajo, because they won't know enough to go look behind the house to see how many little tough sheds are back there. So yeah, it's data. Data's an issue. Kelly, you're off. You're muted, Kelly. You're okay. You're back.
Okay, you hear me now? Thank you for that. And there's great literature out there talking about misclassification of various data sets or larger data sets like cancer registries, with misclassification of Native folks in those registries up to 30 or 40%. So that's pretty significant. And absolutely on the COVID data, we're experiencing some of the same issues in our area as well. Yeah, so I think, getting more of us into these positions to do this work is ideal. And it's a great way to help dismantle some of the barriers and, misconceptions that continue to kind of be out there in the world. We need more of us doing this work, absolutely. So we are just wrapping up to almost 8 o'clock, and I want to just take a minute. We have about 4 minutes left, and I want to just turn it back to both of you and just ask, is there any takeaway advice or something that you would like to offer to the folks who've remained on the phone, on the webinar with us this long?
I think I could say mine quick enough. Just build really good relationships. Reporting in Indian country and in Indigenous communities starts early and often, and it's connecting with them, sharing stories that you've done, being very explicit about what you want to accomplish. And sometimes if you're an audio reporter or TV reporter, you need to be very explicit in like what you're going to want to do. If you're going to be recording someone or taking video of someone, you need to tell them exactly what is happening. I use the term, and I continue to use the term, of informed consent. Like, if you do everything in your power to let them know what you're doing and they say no, you've done your job.
Yeah.
However, you are more likely to get them to respond positively to it if you let them know up front exactly what you're doing. And you could sort of show your work. You can show examples of your reporting that you've done in the past, particularly if you've reported on Indigenous issues, if you've reported on Indigenous issues in that community. That's super valuable. And even after your story is done, make sure that you continue working on that relationship. The last thing that you want to do is exploit or extract from a Native community. And if you do that and then you don't ever reach back out, you've pretty much burned them as a source from then on out. So build good relationships.
Yeah. That's pretty much the same thing is if you want to report on Indian country before you put pen to paper or finger to keyboard, do all your homework, build your relationships, build your friendships. Don't be afraid. You're going to get told no. And sometimes you'll get told no 2 or 3 times. Don't make a pest of yourself, but definitely put yourself in the way of them seeing you engaging with the community. Whether it's here, it would be like going to bird singing, going to tribal rodeo. Spend some time, get to know people, go to the cultural center, be humble. That was some of the most important thing I can tell you is be humble. Don't go in there like you're a big time reporter and I just want to tell your story. Be humble. Don't be afraid to say, I don't really know anything about your community, but I want to learn and I want to do it in a respectful way. And definitely continue to be humble. I've been an Indian all my life, and I've been working with Arizona tribes for more than 20 years. I've still only barely scratched the surface. I still run into things I don't know. Never be afraid to say you don't know, but you are open to learning. And gather all the sources that you can. There are some anthropologists who are okay, but take most of what they say with a grain of salt, especially the old ones, because Back in the old days, you would send a male anthropologist into a community, and the men would talk to that person, and the women wouldn't. And half the time, you're missing more than half the story, because the women wouldn't talk to them. There's some things that are only for women. And again, be humble, be respectful, learn everything you can. Like Tripp says, keep those relationships going, and don't just parachute in and parachute out. That is the most disrespectful thing you can do. Don't do your, token Indian story and go on to something else, because you'll be wealthier for it by pursuing these relationships. You'll be gaining trust. Hopefully, then the person that goes behind you later on will take these lessons to heart, and they will have an easier time, especially to continue those same things that you've been doing. That's about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Both of you are so incredibly generous, and I just really appreciate you. And, thank you for being here, and thank you for including me in this process. Hi, Ashley. You want to close us out?
Hi, yes, thank you again so much to Deb and Tripp and Kelly for helping us have this discussion tonight. We obviously can't possibly cover a fraction of these topics, but we are really hoping that this will be just the start of a series of discussions on this, and that we'll be continuing these discussions in the future. I know that people had more questions, and and so we can keep those in mind for future discussions as well. There were a lot of great resources that were shared tonight, and we've been taking notes, and we're going to be sharing some of those books and websites and other sources of data and things like that in a follow-up email for those who registered. And we'll also be creating a resource page on the Northwest Science Writers Association website, which is nwscience.org. And then you can also find out more information about the organization and join there as well. And I think that's pretty much it. This has been a really wonderful discussion. I'm so humbled and grateful that you guys were able to take this time. It's such a hectic and really emotionally draining time that we're living in 2020, and it's not nothing to come and have these meaningful and thoughtful discussions with our community here. So thank you again, and I look forward to continuing these discussions. And thanks to all of our panelists and all of our attendees as well. So
yeah,
thanks again.
Thank you. Stop.